Just as the ship was attacking the Japanese on two fronts successfully, the confusion of battle led to her own flesh and blood turning on her. In the darkness and chaos of battle, a massive cruiser turned on the ship, firing shot after shot. The ship's crew jumped to action, ready to defend themselves against the Japanese, only to find to their surprise that it was not the Japanese, but another American ship. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get in. As many of us know, World War II would begin in Europe on September 1st, 1939, following Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland. After this, the rest of the world began to prepare for war, including the United States, which had not yet joined the conflict. Part of the preparation was a ship called USS Atlanta. USS Atlanta was an Atlanta-class light cruiser being laid down on April 22, 1940 at Kearny, New Jersey by the Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. She was launched on September 6, 1941, sponsored by Margaret Mitchell, author of Gone with the Wind. Between this time and her commissioning, the Imperial Japanese Navy would attack the United States Navy base at Pearl Harbor in Honolulu, Hawaii on December 7, 1941, launching the Americans into World War II. Atlanta was later commissioned at the New York Navy Yard on December 24, 1941. Before we get too far into her story, let's look at her spec. USS Atlanta was an Atlanta-class light cruiser with her displacement sitting at 6,718 long tons standard and 8,340 long tons maximum. She was 541 feet 6 inches long overall, had a beam of 53 feet wide, a mean draft of 20 feet 6 inches, and a maximum draft of 26 feet 6 inches. She averaged 673 officers and enlisted. As for propulsion, she was equipped with 4 steam boilers capable of producing 75,000 shaft horsepower, which turned 2 geared steam turbines that turned 2 propellers. With this setup, she averaged 32.5 knots. Next, let's look at her armor and armament. For armament, she was equipped with 16 twin-mounted 5-inch 38 caliber Mark 12 guns, 16 1.1-inch 75 caliber anti-aircraft guns in 4 sets of 4, 8 single-mounted 0.79-inch Oerlikon anti-aircraft cannons, and 8 21-inch torpedo tubes. As for armor, she had belt armor ranging from 1.1 to 3.75 inches, 1.25-inch thick armor on her deck and turrets, and 2.5-inch thick armor on her conning towers. She'd entered the war in the thick of it, and she was ready for anything. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comment section below. Okay, let's get into her career. After fitting out, she went on her sea trials or shakedown cruise until March 13, 1942, first in Chesapeake Bay and then in Maine's Casco Bay. After this, she returned to the New York Navy Yard for post-shakedown repairs and alterations. Adjudged to be ready for distant service on March 31st, she left New York for the Panama Canal Zone on April 5th. She reached Cristobal, Panama on April 8th. After passing through the canal, she reached Balboa, Panama on April 12th, with orders to reconnoiter Clipperton Island, a small, barren, and uninhabited atoll about 670 miles southwest of Acapulco, Mexico, while on her way to the Hawaiian Islands. She checked for enemy activity and found none, arriving at Pearl Harbor on April 23rd. She kicked off her quick stay in Hawaii with an anti-aircraft practice off Oahu on May 3rd. And after this, Atlanta, along with the destroyer McCall, sailed on May 10th as an escort for the auxiliary ships Rainier and Kaskaskia, which were both bound for Noumea, New Caledonia. On May 16, 1942, she joined Vice Admiral William F. Halsey's Task Force 16, formed around the aircraft carriers Enterprise and Hornet, as it steamed back toward Pearl Harbor, having been summoned back to Hawaiian waters in response to an imminent Japanese thrust in the direction of Midway Atoll. TF-16 arrived at Pearl Harbor on May 26th. Atlanta again sailed with the task force on the morning of May 28th. Over the next following days, she screened the carriers as they operated northeast of Midway in anticipation of the enemy's arrival. At the report of Japanese ships to the southwest, on the morning of June 4th, Atlanta cleared for action as she screened Hornet. Squadrons from the American carriers sought out the Japanese, and during that day, planes from Yorktown and Enterprise inflicted mortal damage on 4 irreplaceable enemy aircraft carriers. Japanese planes twice hit TF-17, and it took the brunt of the enemy attacks. Over the days that followed during the Battle of Midway, Atlanta remained in the screen of TF-16 until June 11th, when the task force received orders to return to Pearl Harbor. Atlanta reached her destination on June 13th, and she remained in port, taking on stores and provisions as well as standing on 24 and 48-hour alert into July of 1942, other than brief periods of anti-aircraft practice on the 21st and through the 25th to the 26th of June. She was dry docked on July 1st through the 2nd so that her keel could be scraped, cleaned, and repainted, becoming available on July 6th, resuming her busy schedule of gunnery practice with drone targets, high-speed sleds, and inshore bombardment in the Hawaiian operating area. On July 15th, she and TF-16 sailed for Tonga Tapu. She anchored at Nuku'alofa, Tonga on July 24th, where she fueled the destroyer Mori, and then took on fuel from Mobilube. The light cruiser pushed on later the same day and overtook TF-16. On July 29th, as all preparations proceeded for the invasion of Guadalcanal, Atlanta was assigned to TF-61. She remained here until August 9th as she screened the carriers launching airstrikes to support the initial landings on August 7th and 8th. For the next several days, she remained at sea, replenishing when necessary while the task force operated near the Solomons. That leads us nicely into the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. While Americans consolidated their gains on Guadalcanal, the critical need for reinforcements prompted Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto to send the combined fleet south to cover a large troop convoy. If you want to know more about the combined fleet, we do have an episode on it. American scout planes spotted the Japanese forces on the morning of August 23rd. With the enemy reported to the northwest, Enterprise and Saratoga launched search and attack planes, but they failed to make contact because of worsening weather and the fact that the Japanese, knowing they'd been seen, reversed course. Throughout the day on August 24th, Atlanta received enemy contact reports and screened Enterprise as she launched a strike group to attack the Japanese carriers. At 4:37 p.m., unidentified aircraft were approaching Enterprise and Atlanta, with Atlanta increasing speed to 25 knots and Enterprise launching a strike group. The incoming enemy bombers and fighter aircraft from Shokaku and Zuikaku prompted the task force to increase speed to 27 knots. Shortly after Enterprise completed launching her own aircraft, the Japanese raids swooped in around 5:10 p.m. Over the next 11 minutes, Atlanta's batteries contributed to the barrage over Enterprise as the light cruiser conformed to Enterprise's every move as she maneuvered violently to avoid the dive bombers. Despite heavy anti-aircraft fire, Enterprise took one hit and suffered shrapnel damage from an estimated 5 near misses. Atlanta was not damaged and might have shot down 5 of the attackers. Atlanta reported to TF-61 the next day and operated with them for the next few days. When I-26 torpedoed Saratoga on August 31st, the light cruiser screened the stricken flagship as Minneapolis rigged a tow line and began taking her out of danger. The force ultimately put into Tonga Tapu on September 6th, where Atlanta provisioned ship, fueled from New Orleans, and enjoyed a period of upkeep. She would mainly transport ships for the majority of September and October, until October 28th, when she brought on Rear Admiral Norman Scott from San Francisco and became the flagship of the newly designated TG-64.2. After fueling from Washington, Atlanta, screened by 4 destroyers, headed northwest to shell Japanese positions on Guadalcanal. Reaching the waters off Lunga Point on the morning of October 30th, Atlanta embarked Marine liaison officers at 5:50 a.m. and then steamed west, commencing her bombardment of Point Cruz at 6:29 a.m. while the destroyers formed a column astern. Provoking no return fire, TG-64.2 accomplished its mission and returned to Lunga Point, where Atlanta disembarked the liaison officers. Then she proceeded, in company with her screen, to Espiritu Santo, where she arrived on the afternoon of Halloween. Atlanta, serving as Admiral Scott's flagship with her 4-destroyer squad, escorted Zealand, Libra, and Betelgeuse to Guadalcanal. The cruiser and her consorts continued to screen those ships, designated TG-62.4, as they lay off Lunga Point on November 12th, unloading supplies and disembarking troops. At 9:05 a.m., the task group received a report that 9 bombers and 12 fighters were approaching from the northwest and could reach their vicinity at about 9:30 a.m. At 9:20 a.m., Atlanta led the 3 auxiliaries to the north in column, with the destroyers spaced in a circle around them. 15 minutes later, 9 valves from Hio emerged from the clouds over Henderson Field, the American airstrip on Guadalcanal. Zealand, Libra, and Betelgeuse were minorly damaged, returning to the waters off Lunga Point and continuing working cargo and disembarking troops. At 10:50 a.m., Atlanta received word of another incoming Japanese raid. 15 minutes later, Atlanta led the 3 auxiliaries north with the destroyers in a circle around them. The 27 Bettys from Rabaul closed, sighted bearing west by north, approaching from over Cape Esperance in a very loose V formation. The destroyers opened fire, but the planes proved to be out of range and the ships checked their fire. The Bettys ignored the ships and continued on to bomb Henderson Field. Upon the disappearance of the planes, TG-62.4 resumed unloading off Lunga Point. On November 12th, Atlanta would take part in an afternoon assault from the Japanese, and only San Francisco would be damaged when one downed Betty would hit her superstructure. After the end of the skirmish, the work of unloading the transports and cargo ships resumed. The abrupt end of the air attack gave Atlanta and friends only a brief respite, as trouble approached from yet another quarter. A Japanese surface force made up of 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 6 destroyers was detected steaming south toward Guadalcanal to shell Henderson Field. Admiral Callahan's support group was to, quote, cover the retiring transports and cargo vessels against enemy attack. TG-67.4 departed Lunga Point at about 6 p.m. and steamed eastward towards Sea Lark Channel, covering the withdrawal of TG-67.1. An hour before midnight, Callahan's ships reversed course and headed westward. Helena's radar picked up the first contact at a range of 26,000 yards. As the range closed, Atlanta's surface search radar, followed by her gunnery radars, picked up a contact on the enemy ships. Admiral Callahan's order for a course change caused problems almost immediately, as Atlanta had to turn to port immediately to avoid a collision with one of the 4 destroyers in the van, the latter having apparently executed a ship's left rather than a column left movement. As Atlanta began moving to resume her station ahead of San Francisco, she was illuminated by the Japanese destroyer Akatsuki. Atlanta shifted her main battery to fire at the enemy destroyer, opening fire at a range of about 1,600 yards, and, along with the other U.S. ships that concentrated on Akatsuki's searchlights, overwhelmed the destroyer. 2 other Japanese destroyers crossed her line, so Atlanta engaged both with her forward guns while her aft guns continued to fire on Akatsuki. An additional unidentified assailant opened up on the light cruiser from the northeast. At about the same time, at least 1 torpedo plowed into Atlanta's forward engine room from the port side, fired almost certainly by either Inazuma or Ikazuchi, Akatsuki's destroyer consorts. Atlanta lost all but auxiliary diesel power, suffered the interruption of her gunfire, and had to shift steering control to the steering engine room aft. Meanwhile, Akatsuki drifted out of the action and soon sank with heavy loss of life. Michiharu Shinya, Akatsuki's chief torpedo officer, one of her few survivors, was rescued the next day by U.S. forces and spent the rest of the war in a New Zealand POW camp. He later stated unequivocally that Akatsuki had not been able to fire any torpedoes that night before being overwhelmed by gunfire. Soon after being torpedoed, Atlanta was then hit by an estimated 19 8-inch shells when San Francisco, quote, in the urgency of battle, darkness, and confused intermittently a friend or foe, fired into her. Though almost all of the shells passed through the thin skin of the ship without detonating, scattering green dye, fragment from their impact killed many men, including Admiral Scott and members of his staff. Atlanta prepared to return fire on her new assailant, but San Francisco's own gun flashes disclosed a distinctly, quote, non-Japanese hull profile that resulted in a suspension of those efforts. San Francisco's shells, which passed high through Atlanta's superstructure, may have been intended for a Japanese target further beyond her from San Francisco's perspective. After the 8-inch fire ceased, Atlanta's Captain Jenkins took stock of the situation and, having only a minor foot wound, made his way after to Battle 2. His ship was badly battered, largely powerless, down by the head, and listing slightly to port, and a third of the crew was either dead or missing. The situation was dire. As the battle continued, the light cruiser's men began clearing debris, jettisoning topside weight to correct the list, reducing the volume of seawater in the ship, and aiding the many wounded. In the black of night, Atlanta struggled to stay afloat, and the daylight would only illuminate this fact. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay, let's look at Atlanta's sinking and wreckage. As day broke, 3 burning American destroyers, the disabled Portland, and the abandoned hulk of Udachi, which Portland dispatched with salvos, were discovered. Atlanta, drifting toward the enemy-held shore east of Cape Esperance, dropped her starboard anchor, and her captain sent a message to Portland explaining the light cruiser's condition. Boats from Guadalcanal came out to take her mostly critically wounded. By mid-morning, all of those had been taken off the ship. USS Bobolink arrived at 9:30 a.m. on November 13th, took Atlanta under tow, made harder by the cruiser's still lowered anchor, and headed toward Lunga Point. During the voyage, a Betty bomber neared them, and one of the 2 surviving 5-inch mounts, which was powered by a diesel generator, fired and drove it off. The other manually rotated mount could not be trained on the target in time. Atlanta reached Kukum at 2 p.m., at which point Captain Jenkins conferred with his remaining officers. As Jenkins, who was awarded a Navy Cross for his heroism during the battle, later wrote, quote, "It was by now apparent that efforts to save the ship were useless and that the water was gaining steadily. Even had sufficient salvage facilities been available, he allowed, the severe damage she had taken would have made difficult to save her. He was authorized to act as his own discretion regarding the destruction of Atlanta and ordered her abandoned and sunk with a demolition charge." All remaining men except for Captain Jenkins and a demolition party boarded Higgins' boats sent out from Guadalcanal for the purpose. After the charge had been set and exploded, the last men left the battered ship. At 8:15 p.m. on November 13, 1942, Atlanta sank 3 nautical miles west of Lunga Point in about 400 feet of water. Her name was struck from the Naval Vessel Register on January 13, 1943. She was awarded 5 battle stars for her World War II service and a Presidential Unit Citation for her, quote, "heroic example of invincible fighting spirit in the Battle of Guadalcanal on November 13, 1942. 170 of her men were killed, and 103 were wounded. Rest in peace to the men lost on USS Atlanta, and I thank them for their service." 50 years after her sinking in 1992, Dr. Robert Ballard, the same man responsible for discovering the wrecks of Titanic, the Bismarck, and PT-109, found the wreckage of Atlanta. Unfortunately, strong ocean currents and poor visibility prevented the expedition from exploring the wreck thoroughly. Many wrecks found in Iron Bottom Sound by Dr. Ballard are beyond the current technical limit for scuba and are only accessible by ROVs or submersibles. Dr. Ballard gives an account of this in his book The Lost Ships of Guadalcanal, and you can check my Amazon storefront for that book, linked in the description of this episode. In 1994, 1995, and 1998, Rob Kaysen and Kevin Dunley, 2 Australian technical divers, made dives to USS Atlanta, though very few dives have been conducted since then. In May of 2011, a very experienced deep diving team from Global Underwater Explorers successfully videoed the wreck for documentary purposes, the first survey of the wreck since Dunley's expeditions up to 1998. A dive conducted in April of 2024 by Bruce Kuko and Peter Taw found the hull and bow of Atlanta had completely collapsed just forward of the number 1 5-inch gun. Next week, we have 2 very special collaboration episodes to kick off October, so please be on the lookout for those. Thank you all so much for your kind words and amazing response to my return to YouTube. I'm so excited to see where this channel goes next and to continue to make improvements over time.